Hour. I know everyone's time is very valuable. The last 5 minutes, and maybe Nicole or someone can cue me when we're at the last 5 minutes, we're going to have sort of the press just open up and ask questions of the governor and others at the table. And of course, I assume the governor and others will be available subsequent to that for sort of private one-on-one interviews. So that's pretty much it. So the basics is, we have a couple different groups here today, and as opposed to having everyone sort of give an intro, I'll just sort of jump around and do that for them. To start with, we have Andrew and Skylar from the governor's office. Andrew's the director of, we call him the marijuana czar, but really is the governor's office of marijuana coordination, the director of that. Has had a fascinating job for the past several years. Skylar is his deputy. Thanks for being here, guys. The second kind of pocket of people is we have the Department of Revenue. We're incredibly honored to have the head of the Department of Revenue, Barbara Grohl, here at the head of the table, her communications officer as well. Another pocket of individuals, we have elected officials. We're very fortunate to have Representative Jonathan Singer here, who's been an absolute leader on this topic and has really tackled some of the issues in the past several years that have been necessary. I'm a senior elected official. We have former Representative Paul Weitzman, who currently is an elected official in Boulder, though. That's not appointed, that's elected. So, we're fortunate to have him. He's, of course, been a voice on this issue for many, many years. We also have business owners here. We have Josh Barch with Doctor's Orders, Christy Kelly with Good Meds. They've really been doing this for 5 years or so at this point. So I think they're still standing. So they've learned a lot of lessons along the way. And I think work very closely with the government entities and try to foster a relationship there. So I'd love to hear from them about their experiences. And then I think the final group is just sort of citizen advocacy groups. And I did want to mention, so you are no longer with the trade association, you are a business owner.
Right, well, I'm with the business.
Okay, Meg Collins, former trade association, now with a business as well, Good Chemistry. And then I believe our last kind of bucket of individuals is essentially citizen advocates, Mason DeVert with the Marijuana Policy Project, Jason Thomas, former law enforcement agent with LEAP, and Brett Williams, who is with Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and as a law student at the University of Denver, my alum. And then we do have Sean and Brian in the back, who are military veterans, citizen voices, decided to join us as well. So thanks for being here, guys. So I think we just have a tremendous group of people here. With that said, I'm going to kind of turn things over to Barb. Again, within her role at the Department of Revenue, she's sort of helped create the infrastructure, guide the infrastructure to deal with this new policy field industry. So if you wouldn't mind just spending a couple minutes kind of speaking, it gives a little background on the infrastructure that manages this billion-dollar industry in Colorado, and sort of your experiences there.
Sure. So I have been working on marijuana regulation since 2011. When I was appointed by Governor Hickenlooper as the head of the Department of Revenue, we had the marijuana, at that time it was called the Medical Marijuana Enforcement Division, and it was our first foray into regulating marijuana at all, and we had a lot of bumps in the road. And so what we did is we went back to the drawing board essentially, and we were figuring out exactly what was working, what was not working there, and how we were going to continue to move forward. At that time, then Amendment 64 was put on the ballot, and we spent a year looking at that and vacillating between, oh my God, and how we're going to make this work, because the amendment itself said that recreational marijuana or marijuana for non-medical use would be regulated out of the Department of Revenue. So with that, we knew we were the first in the world to do this. Even though Washington also legalized this at the same time, I always say they were an hour behind us, so we were actually first. But that's the first thing. The second thing was they had a very I think they had a lot more discretion as to when they actually began to roll out. All of our timelines were in the amendment. We actually went from kind of ideation to stores open in 12.5 months. The amendment itself said that we had to have rules in place by July 1st of 2013. We had to begin accepting applications on October 1st of 2013, and we had to start providing or issuing licenses no later than January 1st, 2014. So it was a lot of work, and we had to really figure out how we were going to do this. We had no model by which to really model ourselves after. But what the governor did, which was, I think, pretty brilliant, was he did two things. He, after he proclaimed the election, he issued an executive order putting together a task force. And I, along with his chief legal counsel, Jack Finlaw, were the co-chairs of that task force. So we were charged with bringing a wide variety and diverse group together to identify the issues, identify possible solutions, and then provide recommendations and a report to the General Assembly, the Attorney General, and the Governor, no later than, some point beginning of March. And we did that. It was pretty yeoman's work, but I think it was because of that and the people that were around the table. We had law enforcement, public defenders, district attorneys council, physicians, parents groups, we had employers, employees represented. It was just a number of very large, diverse individuals with very diverse viewpoints. So we were able to really ferret out the issues. And that has really served us well, because what we have done then is we've used that model with everything we've done up to now. And when I say that we were the first, I mean that very sincerely. And so when you don't really have a model to follow or a path to follow, you have to find guideposts. And our guideposts were three. Keep this out of the hands of kids, keep this out of the hands of criminals, and keep this out of other states. And so every decision we made, every statute that we supported, every rule that we put in place, every guideline that we did, we always mapped back to those three things. And that really served us well, because when the Department of Justice came out with their subsequent Cole memo in August of 2013, pretty much everything we had put in place was already addressed.
How do you keep it out of states?
Well, we're doing a number of things now. We partner very much with local law enforcement, and we've been able to do that. The second thing is that we have a seed to sale tracking system, and what it does, it has RFID, so radio frequency identification chips, on all plants, and they go from seed all the way, or actually the plant name, because no one really plants seeds anymore. And it grows and it goes with the plant all the way through the harvesting phase of it. And then once it gets harvested, it also then it translates that RFID tag becomes a label with that RFID technology, and it gets onto the package and it goes out to the stores, and it's also gets placed on any edibles or non-edible products that are from that original batch. So we can track it from seed to sale. We also have production guidelines that we address, and the reason for that is because you always want supply and demand to be equal. If you have greater demand than you have supply, that additional demand will go to the black market in order to satisfy their need for demand. If you have more infused product manufacturers and 512 centers. But on the retail side, we have 471 cultivations, 132 infused product manufacturers, 372 stores, and 16 testing labs.
And these stores, are they exclusively for this purpose?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And for the medical marijuana stores or centers, you have to have a medical marijuana card before you can even walk into the store. And that gets, and they will.
How do you apply for that? Through your health department?
Through our public health department.
And what is it? It's a thing that's prescribed by a doc?
Well, prescribed is not the right word, and the doctors don't like that word, but it's a recommendation. So if they go to a doctor and they get a recommendation based on a list of criteria, and they get their medical marijuana card, and we call it a red card here because it's red ink, then they can purchase, and with that recommendation comes the amount of marijuana that they can have based on their illness. On the retail side, you have to be 21 or over to go in there. And in fact, we do, just like we do underage compliance checks with liquor and tobacco, we do underage compliance checks with these businesses as well. And for the most part, we have a greater compliance rate than we do in other industries. Yeah, exactly.
So they apply for the card through they get the recommendation from the doc, and then they apply for the card through your state department.
Our public health and environment, yes.
Well, excellent. Thank you, Bart. I was going to maybe jump over to the governor's office, Governor Hickenlooper, just to hear a little about your kind of experiences, or if you sort of tap
Yeah.
on any further.
So first of all, my job came around because the Department of Revenue was doing an amazing job, but there was 9 other departments that are actually involved in helping to legalize marijuana. Everything from the Department of Agriculture, Department of Public Health and Environment. Sometimes there's water rights issues, and it really there's basically no department it didn't touch. And obviously, the governor wanted to put forward the vision, and I don't think it's a shock to anybody or news to anybody here. He was against Amendment 64 before it came out, but really committed to, all right, this is democracy, this is the people's, and if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. And so there's been a very big commitment to good government and making sure that marijuana is treated like every other industry here, but that we're not harming public health, public safety, and we're keeping it out of the hands of kids. I'll say it's a strange system we've put together because it's all written into the Constitution, and so we have tensions that we still deal with every day. So back in 2000, we started with caregivers and a really pretty unregulated system of people growing for other people's red cards. And now we have a very robust license system up, and so you have licensees. I hear this a lot in Pueblo, for instance, that licensees are losing out in the market sometimes to caregivers or people who are pretending to be caregivers and selling into a black market instead. And so we have a lot of things in Colorado that it's not like we just sat down and wrote a unified system at one point. The system has evolved over the course of 15 years. And so those are the continual discussions that we have.
And so you guys also have to enforce on the people that are not licensed to produce and grow and supply.
Yeah, and they have pretty big privacy protection rights that are written into the Constitution. So they are not the same sort of open book system that the licensees are. And we worked on that last year. We have a bill that now I think more closely allows us to understand how big the caregiver market is. And Representative Singer here was a co-sponsor on that bill, And it's a tough one because it's also coming from a culture of people who have been using marijuana medically for a much longer period of time and have very close relationships with some of these caregivers as well. So don't want to be in the license system. But then they're also, this is where a lot of our bad actors are hiding. And so you see once a month or so, 1,000 plant grows get shut down, and even in depositions they're saying, yeah, there's just so many loopholes and ways to grow that we just thought we could sit comfortably between this gray area. And so those, I think from the governor's office, I think the governor's been highly complimentary of what the licensee system has done, and now we're looking towards how do you actually get rid of the bad actors in the black market in order to deliver the promise that Amendment 64 had.
So Andrew, I mean, we have 4 states that have legal 21 and over marijuana, 23 states medical marijuana, including Maryland. Perhaps we can jump over to Representative Singer to speak sort of as a state rep. What experiences have you had? Perhaps maybe there's some other lessons for other states that are looking at this area.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for being here. I prepared a few brief remarks. Actually, I actually bring this with me to a lot of these meetings. This is actually the recommendations from the first task force on 64, and so you can see it was a little bit of a heavy load and a heavy lift. And the funny thing is, a lot of this is while it's a good historical guiding document, a lot of it, I won't say is almost obsolete, but it almost feels that way because the market is so dynamic it changes. But my introduction to this was a little different because I was one of only 2 state lawmakers out of 100 that publicly endorsed legalizing marijuana and treating it like alcohol. The other one was actually I'm a Boulder County progressive. You might know another one sitting at the table right now, but the other one was a Tea Party conservative, and so now we're friends on Facebook, and that's great.
What the Taco calls the strength of soft ties.
Right. But the funny thing is, you had 2% of the state legislature agreeing with 55% of the state, and so it was really a situation where the state was leading, people were leading, and legislators were following. And so after Amendment 64 passed, a lot of people started to look at me and say, well, you wanted this, tell us how it works. And thankfully, even the opponents have really dropped their guard down and said, okay, well, how do we make this work? And so I would say, from that 10,000 foot view, I think some of the things to recognize is, Colorado's economy is doing well. It's going up. Teen use has either stayed stagnant or dropped off. And at the same time, we're seeing our law enforcement able to actually focus on crimes that actually hurt people. And these are all the big picture sort of things when you say you're from Colorado and you're in any other state, that's the first question they ask about. And the only thing I can tell people is, I can't say I've sampled any of the products. I was a rebel in high school by not using marijuana, so yeah. So there we go. But I knew the cost was too high, and so that to say a little bit about where I was coming from before telling you, some of the things that I don't think any of us predicted. The edibles market is huge. I mean, 40% of the market is in edible marijuana, not the smokable stuff. And so the question is, how do you regulate that in a way that people know exactly what they're putting into their bodies? Because when you eat something as opposed to smoke something, it takes a while to kick in, and that's a safety risk if you don't do it the right way. And so
Maureen Dowd should.
Well, I created a verb when you overdose on it. I call it doubting. No one's picked up on it yet. But I think that's really important that people recognize that those are the sorts of things where the industry stepped up. They started start low, go slow campaign, so people know that you don't eat 12 or 14 cookies all at once. You eat one and wait a couple hours. That's an education curve, though. The other thing I think that where we're really looking for leadership in Colorado at the presidential and federal level is on the banking issue. I mean, this is the one thing where you talk about people coming from across the spectrum to all support an issue related around marijuana. The fact that you had law enforcement sitting next to marijuana consumers, next to marijuana growers, next to the governor's office saying, we need to figure out a solution to the banking problem, because if you want to keep something in the black market, you want to keep it illegal, make sure it's a cash-only business.
Right.
And so I'd say that's the first thing. It's horribly dangerous.
So what are they all doing? Hiring later and whoever the farm guys are.
Well, not everyone's hiding it under a mattress. Probably some of the people that are here can tell you, but I'll tell you, I was on a radio show in Nevada with some folks in the marijuana industry there, and one of the attorneys said, "Oh no, banking's not a problem. We bank with XYZ Bank." Well, the next day,
There goes that.
that bank closed everyone's account, and partially because of the fear of federal intervention, partially because other banks won't do business with them. And so when there's clear and strict guidance from the federal government that really comes out, that opens this door, I think we're in a much better place. Go ahead.
Why did you say that you believe use among young people may have declined? What kind of do we have good numbers on that, or
We
better
do.
than we did, or how do you gauge that?
So the Centers for Disease Control puts out a youth risk behavior survey every year to high school, middle school students, and it's actually
Can you answer it honestly?
very accessible. Well, the question is, have they always been lying on it forever, and now you would expect, now that it's become a normalized behavior, that people would be more likely to be more forthcoming about their use, and so you can look at the trends from now going back to 2009, and even earlier than that. The numbers have either stayed stagnant or dropped. It's within that
We're
margin.
only how many years into this? We're only like.
Well, the law passed in 2012, and the stores came approximately
2013.
But the availability of marijuana from stores has started in 2010 or so, and so
From medical, right?
Yeah.
for medical,
Yeah.
and you did see there's a couple of different places I think the governor's office looks to for Healthy Kids Colorado survey, which is part of the YRBS, and that did show a slight decline in 30-day youth use of when we last took it.
Were they declining on alcohol use as well?
Yeah, alcohol and tobacco.
Oh,
Yeah. And perception of the other
a more
thing
mindful generation, perhaps.
Or it's less taboo.
Well, what's interesting is perception of risk for marijuana also at the same time decreased quite a bit, and so people both according to the last survey, youth both saw it as less risky, but also
Less
were
fun.
slightly less likely to use it. The other thing we look at though also is the expulsion and suspension rates, which have gone up slightly. Expulsion not, but suspension for drug use in schools have gone up slightly over time. Hard to, in the short term,
Drug
parse
use
out
of
what that
marijuana?
means. Yeah, marijuana use. Hard in the short term to know exactly what that means. It could be we're policing it a little bit more now, people are more aware of it. There's some observation bias. Schools don't always report this data because they don't want it on their data sheets, and so that stuff's just going to take many more years.
Have you all experienced, as we've experienced in so many states back east, the big spike in heroin overdoses?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And prescription drug abuse has been a huge focus for us.
So, I mean, we really thought we had the overdose death thing figured out. Every time we expanded drug treatment, we drove overdose deaths down. Until the last 2 years, it's just spiked up, and we were still struggling by the end of my tour of duty to get it down. What have you seen any change in that in the advent of this? That trend line.
I'm not sure if I can speak to the fact there's a needle exchange. I'm on the board of a needle exchange that's a block from here. So there are some progressive changes going on in terms of pushing things that seem to work, harm reduction strategies like needle exchanges, naloxone, which is a substance which I think became legal at the state level last year. Now that can be prescribed to overdose victims.
And we equipped all our cops, all our police officers.
Yeah, that's excellent. Clearly, Maryland and Baltimore have had serious problems with this. In terms of why we believe that epidemic is taking off, it's largely because of the overprescription of opioid drugs.
Right, the
Which,
heavily
and people sort of get into that and then get into heroin, and it's just sort of
It's
messy.
amazing how quickly FDA kind of relaxed the rules on those prescriptions. With so little fanfare, and nobody can look back and say who gave a nod.
Well, prescription drug abuse is perhaps the most widely abused group of drugs in our country. There was a study out a couple years ago that for teenagers in the 14 to 16 age bracket, they have a 17 increase or fold increase over other peer groups for opioid addiction use.
Would you say that again? What age?
15 to 17, I believe it was.
An increase of what percentage?
Increase of 17-fold.
17-fold.
Not just 17% over other peer groups.
There's actually also been some research that came out that found that opiate-related deaths have have increased at a slower rate or are lower in states that have medical marijuana laws, and I don't think that there's enough evidence to draw a final conclusion, but the idea would be that if you've got a number of people who are using marijuana when it comes to chronic pain or other types of conditions where you'd otherwise be getting prescribed a narcotic painkiller, you're reducing people's exposure to that, and it could be playing a role.
Yeah,
I haven't seen any correlation.
Well, I don't know if there's a pull lever. I mean,
Are your numbers still going up on those overdoses?
Colorado was one of the worst states for prescription overdoses a couple years ago, and there have been a number of public health, campaigns since then that have dropped us from sort of that top 5 list. To say that it's a pulley lever is probably too early to say, and it's a little bit of a distraction whenever I say the teen use hasn't really jumped up. I think the important point I was trying to make is that you didn't see this youth bonanza of
That people predicted.
The floodgates.
And you didn't see everybody showing up 3 hours late for work every morning.
No more than usual.
And your economy,
Unless it was a snow day.
your economy at 4-point-something% unemployment didn't tank. Your economy's still doing very well.
The sky is still there.
Yeah, the world didn't come to an
And
end.
maybe we could, on that note, maybe we could hear from Christy or one of our business owners about sort of just briefly their economic impact. I don't know how many taxes you pay or what employees you have. I don't want to put you on the spot, or just generally also what issues you might have in the economic realm, banking, what have you.
Okay. Well, I was in Maryland until 6 years ago when I moved here to
Silver
start
Spring.
this company. Silver Spring, I'm born and raised, and we have Good Meds as a group of medical-only marijuana businesses that operate inside of Colorado. The goal being safe, clean, responsible access for our patients. We treat it like a patient and healthcare model, so it maybe has a feel that is a little bit different than what some people would expect in terms of the in-store experience. Our experiences through that allowed us to parlay that into operations in 2 other states and have facilitated operational council in 3 countries as well. So we have a pretty decent grasp on what is happening in different parts of the country. We're also working in other markets right now, nothing final or definitive, but there might be a state that's coming online soon that I might have a soft spot for. As a result of those relationships and our desire to have a real business relationship with the states in which we operate, we really started paying attention very early on to business issues, the issues of access and safety and security. Banking was a very large issue for our company because we have 55 employees operating out of multiple cost centers. And when we lost our bank accounts several years ago, it was a source of real concern and frustration because until that point, the financial management was in my lap. And suddenly, instead of being able to cut payroll or pay our construction vendors for a facility that is over 100,000 square feet, we were suddenly transporting cash to and fro, and specifically, I was transporting cash to and fro.
Right.
And so that created a dialogue, and I'm now sitting on the board of the Fourth Corner Credit Union, which is the world's first marijuana financial institution, and they are working towards getting their Bedmaster accountant with the hope of being able to serve that banking issue inside of
Who licenses a bank like that? Is that both federal and
Well, the goal is to have, we would like to have a
state charter?
it's a state chartered bank, but there are some federal things that need to lock into place before that happens, specifically the award of a Bedmaster account. There have been some, when you're the first in anything, especially in something that has so much overlap between states' rights and federal law, you're going to have some bumps along the way, and many people around the table have been very actively engaged in those conversations.
But there's no way to do that without getting the federal check off. You can't
we
just
are-
get a state chartered thing?
We are exposed. There are some workarounds, but they present some risk.
Right.
The best way to do it, the cleanest way to do it, and the way to do it in the spirit of what FinCEN guidelines want to see is to execute against having a Bedmaster account. So that's something that is in progress right now. It's an issue
In
that
the meantime,
is being
everybody gets
solved.
paid in cash?
We pay our employees in cash. We pay everything in cash.
Wow.
The other, the way that also relates is, there are some taxation issues that we would love to look at the federal level. All of these, who would ever think about connecting an issue like marijuana with an issue like taxation? But herein lays, our struggle as business owners, because we very much want to be partners in society and do our part. We want to be able to pay taxes freely. We have to go through a very complex system of histrionics in order to pay our taxes, because the IRS does not want us to submit our cash payments in tax and in cash. They would like an EFT from a bank account that we don't have. So there are some complexities there, and with the upcoming election, one of the things that we're feeling is that there's a little bit of exposure. We are operating on a series of memos and sort of a sense of mutual understanding that if we follow the laws and we abide by what the state requirements are, that the priority will be focused on as Barb referred to earlier, the bad apples. That all comes into question with the coming election and what the future of our country looks like. And so we are looking for counsel and leadership and partnership to help resolve those kinds of issues and give us a sense that the securities that as business owners, as responsible business owners that we seek can somehow be secured and allow us to operate in a reasonable, compliant, regulated, safe environment.
So, thank you, Christy. Mason, I saw you wanted to jump in a little bit, but I did just, staying on the topic of the economy in Colorado and the economic impact here. I know your organization tracks closely the tax revenue, job creation. Could you maybe touch on that a bit, please?
Yeah, well, in 2014, there were approximately $313 million in adult marijuana sales in retail stores. So that's a lot of marijuana that would otherwise be sold in the underground market being sold in licensed businesses where the products are obviously being controlled, tested, labeled, and so on.
Number again?
313 million in adult sales. There were actually the more in medical sales. That was in 2014.
Is there by adult you mean recreation?
If someone's using it to go to sleep at night, I wouldn't consider it recreational necessarily,
Sorry,
but yes, recretional adult would be.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, recreational adult would be.
Try you talk about child sales?
Yeah, that would be in adult retail recreational facilities, and so actually we just really learned this and came out that during the fiscal year of 2014-15, there was actually much more revenue raised by marijuana-specific taxes than by alcohol-specific taxes.
In the state of Colorado.
Yeah, there was approximately $70 million in revenue from the specific excise taxes on marijuana sales, compared to about $42 million on the excise taxes on alcohol. So these businesses are certainly paying their share, and so are the consumers. As of June of this year, according to the Department of Revenue, there were about 21,000 valid occupational licenses was the last that we saw. Now, obviously, those people might not all have jobs, but at some point they did, or they had a reason to apply and become licensed to work in these facilities. Every person needs to have a license in order to be there. So you're talking about several thousand jobs. And Christy mentioned she had 55 employees, and I really haven't found a business yet that has fewer than 10. And
How many people do you think are employed in this now?
Oh, there's 21,000 licenses to work in there, and then that's only marijuana directly.
But individual employees have to have a license.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and those are only people who are working directly in these businesses. So then you've also got.
What are there restrictions on a license? Can you only get it if you haven't trafficked drugs before?
Right.
Well, yeah, you have to go through a background check to be an occupant, someone who works in the industry, and there are some restrictions, and one of them is a drug-related charge, but it goes back, if it's been more than 10 years before, then that is something that is okay. It used to be it was a lifetime ban. And then there are other felonies that there's a 5-year requirement that you can't have had a felony within 5 years. So there are certain things, there's good moral character, there's things like that. For the individuals who own businesses, they actually have to go through an extensive fingerprint-based FBI background check, as well as a pretty extensive financial check, because we have to follow the money coming in and the money going out. And so all of those, and they have to be residents of the state of Colorado for 2 years.
And so those are, in terms of those license numbers, those are people who are working directly in these buildings. These are security people. These are people who are working at the counter, working in the grow sites, and so on. Then you've also, of course, got all the other industries that they are utilizing. So you've got construction workers, electricians, they all have attorneys, insurance. They all are using security companies, taking up a whole lot of real estate. Particularly industrial real estate around Colorado, and then
Which was previously vacant.
Yeah.
It was,
Mhm.
it's not just taking over the real estate, it's investing millions of dollars into the refurbishment of what was previously desolate buildings.
And we're very, very careful when it comes to
How intensive is it in terms of your personal property investments? Like when you have a personal property tax here in Colorado, and is it all sprinkler systems or? So for example, in a hotel, you have to invest a whole lot in
Yeah, it really varies. The legislature's raised the threshold of what you need to have in personal property before you're taxed on it. So a lot of the shops themselves are below that threshold. All the grow houses are very much in that threshold. And in Boulder County, they pay in cash at our office a significant amount, for the sprinkler systems, for the fans, for the lights. Yeah, we count it. We have a system in our office. We have a table. There's a form we have made specifically for it, where there's 2 of us that sort of tag team count it, store it, and we carry it to the bank just like they do.
But you can bank it once it gets to you.
We can bank it once it gets to us.
Us too, because I collect all sales, excise, and the special sales tax as
It's
well.
kind of weird, isn't it? It's like, It's no longer the proceeds from.
Nails on games.
To the government.
Yeah.
The state government, federal government, certainly has a different view.
Mhm.
Yeah, we'll take cash, we'll take anything.
Yeah.
What has this done to help you with your drug treatment efforts in the state? I mean,
Well,
have you
there's-
been able to expand it, or did the legislature
So-
earmark proceeds to that?
Ultimately, we're aiming for about a third of our proceeds to go to drug treatment efforts. We, in a much too complicated issue that will hopefully be solved with Proposition BB this year, and a positive vote for us to be able to retain the money. We've been on a much lower budget for the first 2 years with marijuana taxes, and we basically have gone for first marijuana pays its own way with regulation, and then youth prevention programs, along with public safety, making sure we have enough drug recognition experts on the streets, those sorts of things. But this year we're hoping to make a more substantial ask to really bring on drug treatment programs, working with things like Oxford houses so that people have, and I think we would probably broaden that nexus to not really, at least the governor's office, with hopefully working with the legislature, would ask that it doesn't necessarily have to be marijuana related addiction,
Well,
but
you
just
might be able to deploy your heroin program.
Exactly.
and just high risk people in general who have addiction problems.
Well, the big key, and you know this already, is prevention and putting it into after school programs. So the most dangerous time for kids is between the hours of 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. before the parents get home from work. So and some of that money, hopefully, and this has nothing to do with marijuana, but our own tax structure in Colorado. But if the voters support Proposition BB and we can keep those marijuana tax dollars, you'll have millions of dollars going to those kinds of programs to make sure that 4-H is well funded and kids aren't left home alone and are actually doing pro-social activities.
And for kids, while their brain's still developing, the science is pretty clear that this is detrimental.
Yeah. I mean, that's not a question. And for legislators, their brains are atrophying, and it's just as detrimental.
Well, the other, to your point, Governor, another bucket of funds which was resourced through the patients and through the health department's issuance of these patient registry cards is being allocated towards research and development of the medical efficacy or medical impact of cannabis on a number of other disease states right now. So it's sort of a twofold approach. Let's advance the science and understand how cannabis works with specific conditions and diseases. Let's also advance the prevention and the treatment efforts for folks who've been impacted.
Yeah, I would note too, and then perhaps we can hear from our veterans here, if that's okay with you guys, but it's my understanding that of course everyone in this room and everyone in the state is against teens using marijuana. It's really, my understanding of the literature is heavy teenage use is bad for the brain. Experimental use, like President Obama and others engaged in, it's not really shown to have a detrimental effect, but of course we want to prevent that from occurring. And the good thing is, as Andrew spoke to, is Colorado is now funneling substantial amounts of money into what I think are actually very forward-thinking public education campaigns. We didn't like the first round. The second round, we don't need to talk about it.
We can talk about what's next.
So I did just, Sean and Brian, first of all, you guys are veterans of the Army and the Marines for, I think, 10 plus years. Thank you for your service to our country. Briefly, is this medical marijuana, is this an important issue for veterans or things we're missing we should know?
Yeah, personally for me, being critically wounded, on a lot of Oxycontin and morphine and stuff when I was in the hospital, and been to the ER a few times for almost ODing and whatnot, just from what they were prescribing me. So basically did medical marijuana, and actually had an ER doctor tell me I'd rather see you smoke marijuana and get off all these harmful drugs. So I ended up doing that and got off all my medication, and I don't take any opioids or anything for pain other than marijuana. And I think a big problem is like the demonization of marijuana, where like you got the dumb pothead and like people that smoke marijuana can't be successful when there's lots of successful people that smoke pot. Actors, intel guys, whatever, so it's not, you gotta attack that angle, I think, as far as, not all potheads are just, couch locked and, eating brownies, there's more to it than just that. And, yeah, for me, and a lot of Marines that I know, they did the same thing. They got off all their pills, because like you said, a lot of people OD on it. It's basically heroin, you know, OxyContin and whatnot. So, yeah, for me, smoking basically got me off all my pain meds, and a lot of veterans are the same way. And yeah, so as far as their numbers, I don't know if they drop, but I know a lot of veterans have gotten off opioids that smoke and are healthier and more active than while they were on opioids. So that's, you know, just my.
What's been your experience with like the VA and like bridging that balance?
Oh yeah, and yeah, talking to the VA, it's kind of, because it's, I talked to my doctor at the VA, and she said, basically, we can't give you a recommendation, and because it's federal, even though it's legal in the state, they're, you know, they basically monitor me, and, you know, they can't prescribe it or recommend it. Which
So what do
is,
you have to do? Go find another doctor?
yeah, you actually have
practitioner?
Dr. Shackelford. I actually talked to him years ago, and right now I haven't renewed my medical card. I've been doing the recreational thing, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely just go to a doctor and get a recommendation.
I guess if you have the non-medical, you don't even need prescription.
The difference would be that you're going to be subjected to paying some taxes that you otherwise wouldn't have to.
So the medical, there's no taxes?
Medical is only standard sales taxes, whereas on the adult use, there's a excise tax at the wholesale level and a special sales tax at the state level, and in a lot of cases, the local level as well.
Well, here's the other big issue: is you don't put your VA benefits at risk if you have a doctor's recommendation.
Right.
And so, you know, that's been one of the. I mean, that's probably the biggest
And a
difference
lot
for you.
of for the veterans, a lot of like the gray area is gun rights versus getting a medical card, because there was things that I heard. I don't know if it's true. Is like they may limit what you can and can't have as far as weapons when you have a medical card, which for a lot of veterans, they like, you know, we like our weapons, we like, you know, home defense, being able to defend ourselves. So to be able to get a prescription for that and give these rights up, it's a lot of vets, it's not worth it, you know. And I don't know what the laws are, because I haven't really read into a lot of it. Like you said, they're constantly changing, but that was one thing. So that's why a lot of vets just kind of do it under the table or recreational only, or they move to Colorado.
Right. Yeah, no, that's been one of the issues that we've been trying to deal with.
And it's one of those things where, like, I mean, you have a prescription for OxyContin, you can still have weapons, there's no thing, but when you get a prescription for marijuana, all of a sudden it's like, well, now you're dealing with dangerous drugs. So what's more dangerous for people is kind of.
Well, the question is for gun ownership, and I don't want to go too far into this, is are you a law-abiding citizen? And if you're violating federal law,
Yeah,
by even though you're not violating state law, can you own a gun?
Yes.
I think that's the question that people are asking. So,
But I think the point that everyone's trying to get to is that there are complexities that exist between what we're trying to do on the state and what we do on the federal level. And from a veteran's perspective, these complexities and these discrepancies are very apparent. I mean, there are veterans that risk losing their VA benefits because they choose the path of medical marijuana. And there are problems with the VA system itself, where we're already looking for ways to aid veterans in their care. Why take away this critical tool set, right? And why put veterans at that risk level? And I know Sean's going to face these experiences head on in a lot of complications with the VA, and it's kind of just from a veteran's perspective.
Who was Army and who was Marine?
Army and Marines. We still fight about it every to this day. There's a sibling rivalry. Another Navy veteran, a brother as well. So when we get together, it's definitely a lively conversation. No one in the Air Force. No one in the Air Force. Not yet, anyways.
you guys have that at least.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Thanks for sharing that, guys. So we're getting close to an hour. I wanted to make sure anyone that hasn't spoken, if you want to chime in certain ways, or Governor, certainly if you have.
I haven't spoken.
Questions.
Yeah, look, I wanted to. I didn't hear about the law enforcement aspect of this.
Sure.
What can you tell me?
Sure.
What's the insight?
So I'm with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and we're a very close-knit group of former prosecutors, judges, and law enforcement officers. We now speak out against the drug war and its unintended consequences. So we've seen a significant change in Colorado with our crime rates going down. I was talking about tea use and use by children. That's gone down. Well, what we've seen is.
What do you mean your crime rate's going down? Your overall, your UCR, your 7?
I believe it's our drug offenses and violent crimes. that are related to drug offenses.
Uh-huh.
So if you consider, yes, was a black market drug, now it's legal. But if you go into the industrial areas where there's a proliferance of cultivation sites, we now have huge pockets of areas that were never patrolled by police officers that now have hundreds of buildings with cameras outside, cameras inside. So in terms of the security risk from the industry, it's so secure, just like a bank or a casino would be in that regard, that it's helped drive crime down in those areas. Now, unfortunately, what we've seen, in getting back to the heroin epidemic, Mexican farmers can no longer grow marijuana at a price that they can make money. So what we've seen in this last year and a half since Colorado legalized is a shift toward poppy production, which I think has a direct impact from legalization to the proliferance of heroin abuse and subsequent overdoses. Overall, from a law enforcement perspective, we believe that marijuana is not as harmful as alcohol or many other drugs that are considered mainstream and acceptable. That we're seeing changes in a positive respect within our culture and society because of legalization that are impacting daily lives. Nonviolent drug offenders, especially for lower, smaller distributors. There's people doing life in prison at the state and federal level for having a couple joints, a couple ounces. Some crime that, if it's considered a crime, they shouldn't be in prison. Violent crimes, people that cause crimes against the person, absolutely, they're generally bad people. But people in the marijuana trade, generally by and large, unless they're connected to syndicates or organized crime, it's gestation toward a legalized market is giving the opportunity to curtail the black market in that regard.
But in the short term, we may see more poppies being grown in Mexico.
Most definitely. Most definitely. And Colorado's a crossroads for drug
Just be a
distribution.
good argument for why some of these dollars need to go to the heroin epidemic.
Absolutely. Well, Colorado's a crossroads for drug distribution, coast to coast, Mexico to Canada, because of our highways. And so, I haven't read the most recent report from the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Group, but I believe that marijuana distribution is down, but other drugs like cocaine or heroin distribution are up. But because of legalization of marijuana, we're not seeing the cartels, they're more skirting Colorado than just driving right through.
Let me thank all of you for making the time to talk with me about this. From the first moment you guys headed into this uncharted territory, a lot of us who are serving as governors or mayors, in our conversations with one another, we're all of the mind that we really need to watch what happens in Colorado and Washington State and learn from this experience. One of the hard truths we have to, three of the hard truths we have to embrace as a people, I think, are that we lose far too many of our citizens to drug overdoses, far too many of our citizens to violent crime, and have far too many of our citizens locked up and incarcerated. So that, I think, calls upon all of us to be on a constant search and asking the questions every day. What works and what does not work when it comes to actually saving and redeeming lives? And that's been the search I've been on for 25 years of public service. I was a prosecutor for a couple of years in Baltimore City prior to being elected to the Baltimore City Council, and I was a defense attorney for the next 8 years. And then was elected in 1999, in a year when Baltimore had become the most violent, addicted, and abandoned city in America, and had to forge a new consensus to put us on a path for the biggest crime reductions in the country. And at the end of my term as governor, we could look back over our shoulders, having driven our violent crime level down to 30-year lows, but also our incarceration rate down to 20-year lows. And I repealed as governor or decriminalized the possession of small amounts of marijuana in our state, and twice passed medical regimens or laws for medical marijuana. The first one was flawed, so we had to come back and try again the second time around, and I suppose that's those regs are still being rolled out and promulgated by the successor administration. So I really appreciate you sharing your experiences with me and all the work that it takes to be and this collaborative, and that's a reflection on all of you and the tremendous governor you have in John Hickenlooper, that is a modern collaborative leader. And once the people spoke, he put himself in the center of that emerging truth and was asking the questions, what can we do to save and redeem more lives, or stated another way, to reduce harm, and to track this in an open and transparent way so that we'll learn from our experience and others can learn from our experience. So that's what I'm most interested in. I think we should have I think as Americans, given the hard truths I mentioned about violent crime, overdose deaths, and unacceptably high incarceration rates, we should have this conversation and be informed by the true facts and the experience that the people of Colorado are having on the ground here. And so my thanks to all of you and also dedicated state employees who are doing your best to keep this open and transparent and performance measured so all of us can learn from this. And so thank you for the time today.
Absolutely.
And insights.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Governor. And we did, if everyone could stay seated, we did tell the press that they could sort of ask questions of the group or the governor for a couple minutes here, and then of course people will be available afterwards if they want to as well. So I don't know if we have any immediate ask questions, but feel free to jump in.
Questions?
Sorry, Governor, a question. Your position is that marijuana should be Schedule 2?
Yes.
Schedule 2 drug? And as you know, Obama, the current president, is criticized kind of by both sides sometimes for some people say overstepping his executive privilege, but on this he has said, I could reschedule it, but this should be the Congress. If you're president, would you, as president, reschedule it Schedule 2, or do you think that should be done by the Congress?
No, I would reschedule it with the executive authority that the president already has. Sometimes executives, a lot of times on emerging issues, the executive branch also has to exercise leadership, and then the legislature can follow. Sometimes it works the opposite way, but in this particular case, I've committed to moving it to Schedule 2 under the executive authority.
And as just a quick follow-up, if it's Schedule 2, all these business owners you just talked to would be out of business. It would be under FDA control. A Schedule 2 drug like cocaine, you cannot renew a prescription for that. That is still considered high likelihood of abuse and is very controlled. Is that a solution?
Progress zigs and zags, doesn't it?
Progress what?
Progress zigs and zags.
Yeah. Any other questions?
As far as full legalization at the federal level, that is something that goes too far in your mind?
I think we still have to watch, and I think we have to learn from Colorado and Washington State. I'm not there yet, but I am watching very closely what's happening in Colorado and Washington State, and also, sometimes, having been a prosecutor and having been a defense attorney, I can tell you firsthand that very oftentimes laws get reformed by falling into desuetude before they fall into a legislative agenda and are actually changed and reformed. So I think this is I think this is a changing area. I think we need to see, I think a lot of us are still learning from Colorado's experience in Washington State.
In terms of banking, do you think there's something the federal government can help these folks out with?
Yeah, I would think that there would be, and I know that doesn't Congressman Paulus have some legislation that he's introduced on this score? I mean, I would hate to think we have to wait until there's a tragedy before we find a way to safely allow these now legal businesses to bank.
Did you catch an exchange on marijuana in the Republican debate last night? And what are your thoughts on their positions on this?
I did not. I would imagine most of them were against.
Some believe in states' rights, but yes, others stayed far away from the issue. Safe to say.
Yeah. Well, that's why we need to have debates as a party, isn't it?
No Reagan.
So we can talk about
Yes, the last night's debate.
How many are you looking for?
As many as possible. By this time 8 years ago, we had already had 9 debates. So far, we've had 0.
You want more than the DNC has already proposed.
Yeah, more than 0 would be good.
I think they're aiming for 6.
Nowhere to go but up.
They're aiming for just 4 before the first contest, and only 1 in New Hampshire, and that one, the leadership is cynically scheduled for December 19th, when most of us will be shopping or going to Christmas parties with our spouses.
All right, one or two more questions?
Going back to Schedule 2, Governor, I'm just curious. You said you want to watch Colorado and Washington, see how things go here. How long should that experiment go then before you move to the Schedule 2?
I've already said that I would, as president, use my executive authority to move it to Schedule 2.
But how long would you want to wait for Colorado and Washington to see how their legalization programs go? You said you want to watch the experiences that things are happening here.
I would think that after 2 or 3 years, you would have some trend lines and some solid factual evidence upon which to base a new action based on deeper understanding. I think 1 year is too few.
That's what you talk about when you say you're not ready for full legalization yet. You want to watch and see what are the metrics you're looking at. I mean,
Harm reduction, violent crime reduction, overdose reduction. That's what I'm looking for.
All right.
Or at least not any increase. No. We good? You didn't have
thank you.
No?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I was just curious. So I know that you've done a lot of work on social justice, criminal justice reforms, mandatory minimums, and stuff like that. Do you think that marijuana legalization will even register in the primary election?
Oh, I think it definitely will.
How important do you think it will be?
Well, I think it's part of the mix of this sickness we have in our society of violent crime and the numbers of our people that are killing themselves and overdosing on prescription drugs and other drugs. And it's part of the whole issue of racial justice. And make no mistake about it, I mean, there are a few areas that are as intertwined with our painful racial legacy that all of us share as Americans, quite so much as law enforcement, public safety, drug policies. So I think this is actually a very important issue to a lot of people. And if you talk to young Americans under 30, there is a growing consensus that consistent with many of the opinions I heard around the table here, notably from Mason, I think that marijuana should be treated more akin to alcohol than to other substances. I don't have the poll that I can show you, but I can tell you just anecdotally from traveling around the country and visiting and talking with young Americans.
Do you share that sentiment?
Pardon?
Do you share that sentiment about marijuana and alcohol being on level playing field?
Yeah, I'm learning. I recited some of the things that we did, including when I was mayor. I think we got permission from our state legislature to allow the police to issue citations rather than forcing a full custodial arrest. So, I think there's definitely a difference between marijuana and many other controlled substances, and I look forward to learning more from what Colorado's experiences and Washington experiences.
Okay, I really have to call it.